Welcome to the Empowered Mothers Network podcast, supporting mothers to be the best version of themselves. I'm Sarah and this is episode 15 and this one's called The Call of Duty, Changing the Game. So I think this is going to be another fairly short episode. I wanted to start with pulling an oracle card, which I'd often do in situations like I'll do it with like the moon cycle and menstrual cycle. Once a month I'll pull like an oracle card for overall like guidance for that month. So that's quite a useful tool of something to do if you follow your cycles like I do. Sorry, I just went to go and get the box. I used the She Sirens oracle cards by Lisa Lister. It's what I use most of the time now. And the card I got was Game Changer. And I don't know if you can see there on a jumper it says, "Don't be so fucking nice." So that's kind of what I'm talking about today. In terms of call of duties. So firstly, I think, before we delve in a bit more to the oracle card, is what are your own duties? If I say that, what comes to mind? What do you think of? So what do you feel like bound to or expected to do? And are those expectations as well set on you by other people or by yourself? So an example of some duties might be caring for your children, cleaning the house or certain parts of cleaning up in the household, caring for elderly parents, going to your job, doing your job that you're paid to do. So have a think firstly about what you would consider to be your duties in life. And in terms of whether you feel those duties are ones that you've set for yourself. So like, for example, I've set this duty for myself that I will show up every week and record a podcast or talk about something. So that to me is a duty. So I think a lot of the time as well we can sort of see like the word duty as kind of a negative thing. I don't know, sometimes it's got quite negative connotations to it, which isn't necessarily the case. Like, it's not a negative thing for me to come here every week and talk. It can be difficult, and some days I find it more difficult than others because usually I don't even know what I'm going to talk about until the day. But we can sometimes sort of see duties as the really mundane things, like probably a big one for people would be like cleaning the house. And we can see them as kind of negative things, but it's sort of reframing that then and looking at what actually are your duties. And they're not necessarily all bad things. I think once we know what our duties are and we're maybe questioning those and whether to stop or drop some of them if we're feeling too overloaded, as most of us are. So again, I think society is piling much stuff on us, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we do tend to have too many duties individually now. And again, a lot of those are sort of self-imposed in a way, but it's because of what we're seeing and what we're exposed to around us that we feel that we have to carry out those. But there's like again with a lot of things, there's like a spectrum, a scale. There's the balance between knowing that sometimes we do need to just show up and do like the grunt work, in terms of duties, things that we have to do. So I think often duties are found in the difficult and the uncomfortable work that we have in life. And they're not necessarily easy things. For example, like caring for elderly parents, that's something that, you're not going to necessarily say, oh, I'm not going to bother doing this. But at the same time, it can be very difficult. It can be uncomfortable. You can have these thoughts of, I can't do this anymore, or I don't want to do this anymore. And again, I think as I've talked about in other podcasts, is we have this thing now where society and life, everything's been made so convenient and so comfortable for us that we do struggle to do the things that are uncomfortable, that do take hard work and perseverance and persistence and chipping away at it bit by bit by bit. We do struggle with that more now as a collective, I feel, because everything's been made so convenient. So we do have to a degree, seek out the uncomfortable. So there's doing all the hard work and showing up and having the right mindset to do the grunt work, as it were. And then at the other end of the scale, there is the times where we feel we have certain duties and we're maybe pushing on doing those things, and believing things that no longer work for us, like beliefs that no longer work for us, or maybe even never even did in the first place. So that end of the spectrum is in relation to having duties or believing that we have certain duties that we personally need to fulfill. Again, that could be, if we go back to cleaning the house, that might be something like, we internalise that it's our duty to clean the house, and that nobody else can help us with that. What's another example? Like, we might believe it's our duty to contribute to the household financially, and if we have recently had a baby or have young children, it might be that practically that becomes then very difficult to achieve. But because we have that belief and we believe that that's our duty to go and do that, we start pushing to go and fulfill that duty, when in reality, maybe permanently, maybe in this phase of life that we're in, we just need to kind of step back and see the bigger picture and see, is there a different way to approach this? Might it not be my duty at this moment in time to carry out that? It might be in the future, but right now I might need to just review what my duties are and also what my beliefs are about which duties are mine to take. So back to the Oracle card for a minute. I might have pink hair when I'm that age, That'd be quite cool. I've had pink hair before. I was a little bit younger then. So back to the Oracle card of, basically the message with this card is like, don't be so nice. So when that comes up, that's not to be confused with like just blatantly not being kind or being unnecessarily rude or, showing no compassion whatsoever and being stone-faced, hard-nosed, walls up kind of bitch to everybody just for the sake of it. That's not what it's to be confused with. But it means, don't be so nice in this case means like not buying into the good girl archetype so much. So what does it bring up? What does it bring up in you? Like, if you're told to stop being so nice. So, for example, you might be worried that you'll come across as too something. So, like too loud, too opinionated, too strong, too disagreeable in some way. And I think if we're looking at not being so nice, it might be something as simple as we need to put more boundaries in place. And sometimes people are either people pleasers or just don't have those boundaries in place, and other people then just come in and out. And if you've not got boundaries in place, that's when you can get other people's expectations foisted upon you, and that's when you start feeling something is your duty. So it's picking all this apart. It's like peeling these like layers or jackets off of ourselves and getting like to the bottom of who we actually are, which again is easier when we have got boundaries in place, because then we can figure that out without too much kind of energy and influence and expectations from other people seeping into that. And we've had that, all of us will have had that since childhood, because parents have expectations, and then partners have expectations, even our kids have expectations of us. So getting to the bottom of who we actually are, once we do that, then we can, change the game, be a game changer, and take that more out into the world and into our parenting. And I think slowly that is how we do change this world at the moment. Something that the Stoics said in their philosophy was to essentially do your job. Now, that doesn't mean just practically go to work and do whatever your job is. It means showing up as authentically you and doing what you're called to do. So they believe that, like, everybody, even everything, every living thing, everything had, people, animals had a job or a role to do during this life that we're having on Earth. And so doing what you're called to do is something that you can't get the answer to that from society and the world around you. I think all these layers that have been put onto us that I was talking about, like the jackets, the layers, we've got all this like expectations from society of how we should be, how we should act, how we should behave, what our duties are. And this layer of like consumerism as well, which I think I'm gonna have to go into in future podcasts. But the layer of consumerism, which is just, I think, designed to distract the hell out of us so that we don't really get to the bottom of who we really are. And then we stay in a kind of confused state because we're too busy bombarded with all these messages of what we should be having in our life, what we should be buying, what we need, what illnesses we even have to some degree. So it's all adding to the confusion, and we're not really being able to connect with ourselves authentically. But we've got to do that to try and get clear on what the job is that the Stoics were on about that we need to do and what our duties are. So duties, again, I think I mentioned before, they can change in the course of the different phases of your life. So like right now, this is the Empowered Mothers Network podcast, so we're mostly going to be mothers. Some of us will be mothers right at the beginning of the journey, so, pregnant or with babies, young children. Some of us might be further along with older kids. Some of us might have grown-up children and be at that phase of life. But mothering, generally, for people listening, watching to this podcast, is a big part of what our duties currently are. And in that case, I think it's messy. It's like motherhood is messy, parenting is messy. It's something where that is our duty, but we don't need to do it where your kids don't need to see like an animated robot version of yourself. You need to be like more, well, it's easy to say, you need to be more authentically you in parenting as well. And again, we see with society now, especially now, there is a big move towards a certain way of parenting, some of which the ethos that I see in the media and things is great, and some of it is just unrealistic. Again, I think, media, society shows the bits that we want to see. Nobody really actively wants to see the messy parts of life. And yeah, that can be then difficult when we are faced with those messy parts of life ourselves, because we have less of a frame of reference. And I think I talked about this once in a video I did on miscarriage, about it's not talked, it is a bit more nowadays talked about, but it's still one of them things that people aren't really open about. And it's not until you kind of go through that yourself and talk to somebody else one-on-one, you realise how many people have been through a similar experience. But yeah, what I was saying was the messy parts are kind of hidden away, and especially now in like parenting blogs and videos and everything you see like on social media. I don't like social media by now. I do use it a little bit for Instagram, but just to get the word out there about this podcast essentially, and then for my own business, get the word out there that I do herb things. But other than that, I don't like being on it. And there's this move towards sort of this perfect parenting, and it's too what's the word, it's too like twee, it's too much. You can't hold yourself up to that. You'll have days where you are like, on boss and parenting, but many more where you just think, I really didn't do that right, or I messed that up, or I could have done that differently, because it's a learning process. The kids are learning and the parents are learning. So yeah, your kids don't need to see like an animated perfect parent robot version of yourself. I think if you're authentically yourself, and that's what we're all trying to do here, is that there will be times when like your kids do see the parts of you that you don't like about yourself. Those parts, even that can cause you to feel kind of negative feelings like shame or frustration or embarrassment. But things like anger don't have to be hidden away. I'm not talking here about like, extenuating situations. Like, I'm not talking about right at the end of the spectrum of like full on violence or sexual abuse or things. Obviously there's differences between that and just being angry in front of your children. I think when you kind of say to be authentically yourself in front of your children, there will always be people who will call you out for where is the line there, and obviously things like full on violence and violence in any form, and sexual abuse and anything like that is obviously not what I'm kind of trying to get at here. If you've been there, and if you've had your own like parent, for example, where you've kind of seen them being authentically themselves and seen the humanness and the messiness of it all, and then that can reflect back to you, and you can realise that actually it's okay for me to be like that with my children, because it might be that you've seen a side of somebody, for example, your own parents, where you've seen their humanness, and you might learn something from that, and it can then be the same going down the line for your children. They might learn something from seeing you just being human and getting upset in a situation because you're overwhelmed, and you end up crying or whatever. You don't have to be plastic perfect parent, because I think then what are they really going to learn from that? Again, then that's going back to what I talked about in my other podcast about things passing down the line. And then you might kind of voice this unconscious expectation onto your own kids that actually, my mum was such a perfect mum. Nothing ever fazed her. She never got angry. She never got upset. And then I feel like that's how parenting is. And I have to then be like that with my children going down the line. So I think you've got to just be authentically yourself, warts and all, really. And they will see the sides of you that maybe you don't want other people to see. But it's kind of necessary in terms of human development. So knowing yourself leads to more knowing of what duties are yours to take on. So maybe like more on an intuitive level, you know if a duty is yours to take on, or maybe you can then start discerning with, okay, maybe this isn't for me right now, or maybe this isn't mine, and that's maybe been pushed on me by somebody else, or maybe I've just been expecting that I should do this thing or carry out this duty, and I've expected it of myself, but maybe that's not really realistic, and I'm perhaps being too hard on myself. You never know. So just knowing what duties are yours to take on, whether that's like parenting again, or creating, speaking, or simply supporting somebody else or some other people. Because at the end of the day, you are in charge of your life. Some duties, again, are temporary. Some can be incredibly difficult. But if you know what is yours and take what is yours, it's then they aren't the ones pushed on you by society or other people for their own agenda. So you can be more sure that you're doing or carrying out your duties, whatever they are, for the right reasons, and that they are ultimately part of your life path and your life purpose. So it's end of the video question time. So what do you feel that your own duties are in life? So you might have an idea of those. They might be all practical, or you might have some that are maybe a bit more like emotional, so emotional support for somebody else. But if you let me know in the comments below what you feel your duties are, and also how would being less nice, how would being less nice change those duties? Would it change them in any way, or would it allow you to maybe change your focus on what you do and what your duties are? One final point I will say as well is sometimes we can get, and I think I spoke about this in the last podcast, but when we have sort of life situations that suddenly come out of nowhere, something sudden, something just happens, and that can be like a real wake-up call for a lot of things, including what our duties are. So we might have all these subconscious beliefs to a certain point in our life that we are duty bound to do a certain thing or be a certain way, and then something just suddenly out of the blue happens and then causes you to completely reevaluate that, and then that can be a starting point for you to make actual massive changes. So as ever, we are still going with the podcast. That's my duty now. I'm getting quite into it. I'm always looking for more people to talk to on the podcast as well. So I would like to get some more podcast episodes out there about like nutrition and fitness in particular. And although these are places where I'm very interested, I'm not an expert by any means. So it'd be good to chat to somebody about that. In the meantime, if you want to keep up to date with the podcast episodes, then please subscribe or join the mailing list at empoweredmothersnetwork.com. Otherwise, I will see you for the next episode.